Okay, our next piece is called The Untouchables, or Los Intouchables, however they pronounce it in Spanish. My Spanish is terrible. Um, it is by Eric Ravello, who is a Cuban artist. It's from 2013. Um, and it features a variety of issues plaguing children around the world. The right to childhood should be protected, he wrote. Each of the work is a photograph, a photo manipulation, with both a child and an adult posed to demonstrate a contemporary evil. They are posed, obviously, in the form of the crucifixion. So, these evils are range from gun violence to molestation or even the threat of nuclear war. Each of the photos features a child being crucified to the back of an adult, each scene attempting to tell a different story about the loss of innocence. The human sculptures are then photographed with the child's face blurred, resulting in images that are visually jarring and conceptually saddening. It's art, he says, it's communication. The project has been censored by Facebook. That is where I first saw this piece a few years ago. His likes got up to 18,000 before they pulled it. He says, I'm used to the government censorship from Cuba, but with this, my first reaction was, whoa. As of this printing, Facebook never did make a statement about it. But as you can see here, we have in the upper left, we have a young boy with a Catholic bishop talking about specifically the Catholic Church's problem with sex abuse and the hiding of pedophile priests, not reporting it. The next one, you have an obvious tourist and a young Asian girl. The sex slave trade, especially in countries like Thailand, Singapore, is very prevalent and extremely difficult, and there's an actual tourism industry for pedophiles to go to those countries. The next one, of course, is referring to school shootings. You see the little girl in her school uniform crucified to a young man with several firearms, lots of ammunition. When I first started showing this slide in my classes, it's been several years ago now, I asked them what they thought that was about, my students. And usually I would hear gang violence. And nobody at first noticed that the young man's hands were white. All they saw was the red hoodie. And as we know, through the last 7-8 years, the hoodie became synonymous with Trayvon Martin and his murder by George Zimmerman. But no, that's definitely school shootings, thus the school uniform. Bottom left, obviously we have a child with a gentleman in a hazmat suit, or a person in a hazmat suit, and the child has no hair due to radiation. The next piece is actually very specific about a certain region. You have a young girl crucified to a soldier. Now, the dress of the young girl and the uniform and weapon of the soldier is denoting a very specific region. The young girl is in Islamic child attire, and the soldier is dressed as a Israeli soldier, the Palestinian-Israel conflict. And then finally we have a little chubby boy crucified to Ronald McDonald, childhood obesity. Now, Um, this set of images is really provocative. The one thing interesting that I discovered, somebody pointed out to me many years ago, was the boys are all in their underwear, but the girls are all fully clothed. And I think that was very much a conscious decision on the part of the artist, not to be charged with some form of child pornography. I'm sure it got close. I'm sure he was investigated, even with the boys. But I believe the artist decided, I'm just not going to take that chance by doing the girls as well, especially since he's a male artist. All right, next slide. I'm not going to tell you the title of this piece right off the bat. It is by the artist Andrea Serrano, and it is from 1987. And it is a photograph of a statue of the crucifix within some type of filtered lighting. And on its own, it's, it's a very interesting, unique. The light's really beautiful. So I want you to look at it for a couple minutes before I reveal the title. And see if you can find anything controversial about it. Now let's see if you find anything controversial about it. This is a piece entitled Piss Christ. Historically, repurposing religious iconography has been a surefire way to scandalize due to its enduring cultural taboos. In other words, things are off limits. When Andrea Serrano displayed Piss Christ, a photograph of a crucifix submerged in the artist's urine, it was widely seen as disrespectful to Christians. It eventually earned the condemnation of conservative U.S. senators and sparked debates around the issues of public arts funding. All this time later, in France, French Catholic fundamentalists destroyed a print of the photo on display in Avignon, France. Obviously, the photographs can be reproduced. Now, Serrano, who is a practicing Christian, originally said that the piece had no specific political motivation. He has since suggested that it was meant to highlight the continued cheapening of the image of Christ and the hypocrisies of those who twist the words of Christ to fit their own needs. Now, prior to knowing the title, and prior to knowing what was causing this filter, it's a very mundane image. Lots of warm, bright color, reds, yellows, oranges. Nothing spectacular or weird about it. However, once you see the title, and once you find out what that little plastic crucifix that he just bought on the side of the street is sitting in, all of a sudden it becomes way more. If you never knew the name, if you never knew what it was floating in, it would never really be seen as necessarily controversial. So sometimes you have to look at art with innocent eyes first. Now, Serrano says when he first unveiled it, I had no motivations behind it. I'm going to call bullshit on that right now. You don't get a jar of pee, put a crucifix in it, light it, photograph it, print it, frame it, and then put the title Piss Christ on it, unless you're really trying to piss some people off, no pun intended. So when he says he had no agenda with it, he's full of shit. And of course he would admit that some, 30 some odd years later. But it's, One of those things that until you see and know, there wasn't much to it. It really could have been anything. It could have been an oil painting. So you have to really kind of look at and think about the image separate from how it's made and what its title is sometimes, and decide whether or not you like it. Like, to me, I think the lighting in this one is very pretty. Um, it's a really cool filter effect that, before Photoshop, I think it's really kind of mysterious looking and cloudy, and it's quite beautiful. Then all of a sudden you say, well, yeah, but he's in a bucket of piss. Well, okay, that does change things. You can't help that. All right, next one. Dealing with religion again. Very old. We went way back in time on this one. This is by the Baroque painter, who the Baroque era came after the Renaissance. So this guy's, he's about 70 years after the Ninja Turtles. Caravaggio. A painting entitled Death of the Virgin Mary, or Death of the Virgin. Painted in 1606. When Caravaggio finished this painting for the church of Santa Maria della Scala in Rome, it was extremely controversial. The Carmelites, a religious order within the Catholic Church, commissioned this painting and did not like it at all. It is thought that Caravaggio used a prostitute as the model for the Virgin Mary, which, yes, he did. In fact, many of Caravaggio's models for religious paintings were male and female prostitutes. Not only could he get them for cheap, no pun intended, but he was a little bit of a prick and was like, you know what? I know these religious paintings are my bread and butter, but the church gives me a chapped ass, so I'm going to use hookers. And of course, you don't want the archbishop to recognize a hooker and be like, hey, I know her. So they're not going to say much. Now, moreover than the fact that she might be a prostitute, probably is, he did not include the religious symbolism that were usually associated with the death of the Virgin Mary. There's no reference to the Assumption of Mary into heaven. It is believed by the Catholic Church that when Mary died, body and soul ascended to heaven. And here she is laid out on the slab. Okay, that's not normal. But she's also depicted with bare feet. Was considered to be disrespectful, according to the beliefs of the time. So these guys rejected the painting. They bought a painting from someone else. And, he didn't get paid for it. Somebody else bought it, and they hung it somewhere. But, yeah. So, he, has all the mourners and everything laying around her, and everybody's weeping, but she's just kind of a blobby, middle-aged corpse. No shoes on, laid out. Just, and it was seen as disrespectful. And the fact that, he used a well-known hooker. That probably soured things a little bit. Now we're going to jump way ahead back into the early 20th century. Marcel Duchamp, this is the guy who did the painting of the nude descending a staircase that showed motion in one single painting. He started a movement called Dada, which meant nothing. They asked him what it meant. He said, it's nonsense. He said, so I'm making nonsensical art. It's a sound a baby makes. Dada. So it was his idea to make things ridiculous. And after he left painting, he started doing these things with what were called ready-mades. You got to remember, this is 1917. Mass production of multiple objects was fairly new at this time. The assembly line had been around, but the all of these fixtures, door handles, toilets, indoor plumbing in the cities around the world, you know, bicycles and shoes and clothing. It wasn't handmade at home anymore. There were factories making these things. So he called them ready-mades. And so his idea was something called de-skilling. In other words, it doesn't take skill to make art, it takes a mind. So this was pretty interesting. In fact, there was a group called the Society of Independent Artists, and they refused to include this work, Fountain, in an exhibition, in spite of the fact that in this little group's constitution, it was required to accept all of its members' submissions, no matter how much they hated them. But they drew the line at this one. Fountain and Duchamp's other ready-mades, his term for an everyday object positioned as art, sparked modern discussions about what constitutes real art and, by consequence, a real artist. So this is the earliest stage where artists would challenge the idea of, if I take a wadded up piece of bubble gum and I take it to a museum and I get a fancy marble pedestal and a fancy handcrafted nameplate and I put that wad of bubble gum in there, have I elevated that piece of trash into art because of its surroundings? Okay, that's philosophy. That's a philosophical discussion, and people have argued about it for the better part of a century. And that's fine, because what's more important is the discussion than the actual artwork. Now, the original one that he made, which he signed the words R. Mutt 1917 on it, you could still see here on the left, the price tag is still hanging off the damn thing. I mean, he bought it at a hardware store and took it to the museum or the gallery. So the original was lost. I can imagine it was pretty easy to misplace a urinal. And a replica was created in 1964. So based on photographs or whatever. So the original is really gone. There is no fountain anymore. You can see a replica of it if you really want to. But this is more about getting artists talking and picking fights than it is being creative in terms of using your hands to make something. All right, this next piece is called The Tilted Arc. It was made in 1981 by Richard Serra, who was a very famed architect and artist. An artist doesn't have to dabble in sexuality or religious themes to bring about public outrage. Tilted Arc, a metal wall installed by Richard Serra in a Manhattan plaza in 1981, was eventually taken down because the public thought it was nothing more than a disruptive nuisance. In 2003, by way of comparison, a work by Martin Creed called Number 227, there was a room in which a light turned on and off every 5 seconds, also received harsh public criticism when it won the Turner Prize. It was just a light clicking on and off in an empty office. What angers most people, whether they will acknowledge it or not, is the notion of de-skilling. That people are basically making money out of nothing. The famous adage, my toddler could make that. That's not art. A monkey could do that. That argument has been around ever since modern art was evolved. And there's this big anxiety against a certain type of conceptual art, that seems totally based on an artistic idea and whose execution as an artwork does not require any traditional artistic skills. One of the most notorious lawsuits involving a public artwork is this one, The Tilted Ark by Sarah. It was 120 feet long and 12 feet high, and was commissioned in 1979 by the United States General Service Administration Arts and Architecture Program to be installed in the Federal Plaza in downtown Manhattan. The federal government bought this. They commissioned it to stand outside their building in Manhattan. Heated debate quickly followed after the installation of the Ark in 1981. People denounced the sculpture as ugly, rusted metal wall and argued that it disrupted the flow of the plaza. Furthermore, the public strongly disliked the fact that the Ark was commissioned with public taxpayer money. Motion for its removal proceeded in a matter of months. 1,300 employees signed a petition to rid this eyesore. In 1989, 8 years later, in a 4-1 favor of the sculpture's removal, the power of the public to remove artwork, it was destroyed. In 1983, a new sculpture installation was commissioned for the Federal Plaza by Martha Schwartz, which involved a maze of swirling benches and mounds of shrubbery. In reality, the new installation caused a similar, if not worse, disruption of flow through the plaza. And here's what the plaza looks like today. This is the so now it's this, where it flows through. That's what's in the plaza today, is all of this. The Ark, as you can see from the windows of the building, used to just go here, across this line. Now you have this Pac-Man maze. That's what it looks like. The benches. So, perhaps at eye level it might be a little more pretty, I guess. Alright. Okay. This is an above view of the Ark. They did cut a pretty big swath through the middle of the plaza, I will say that. Okay, our next piece will look familiar to you. This is by an artist called David Czerny, which is, I believe, if I'm looking at it right, Czechoslovakian, yeah. It's entitled Shark, and it was created in 2005. Art comes in many flavors of controversy. Some pieces result in raised eyebrows and a stiff upper lip. And some pieces find viewers blushing and shifting uncomfortably in place. And some elicit quizzical looks, heads cocked, sparking debate to whether or not it's art. Then there are pieces that fiercely reject subtlety in favor of style that grabs viewers by the shoulders, drags them kicking and screaming into the art, and tosses them back into reality without a moment's consideration for what the reaction will be. Czech sculptor David Czerny created Shark, a parody of Damien Hirst's Shark piece, the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. Is it provocative? Is it explosive? No, it's just plain old stupid. Who even pays attention to something this lame? A commenter said. But the fact is it is parody, and it is dealing with, he had a lifelike sculpture made of former Iraq dictator Saddam Hussein, stripped to his underwear, tied his hands hog tied, and then a noose around his neck, which is eventually how the dictator was when he was captured and tried and convicted. He was hanged. Um, and it was, specifically making fun of Hearst's work, but it was also a subtle statement about how the whole capture, trial, and execution of Saddam Hussein, who, no matter how ruthless he was still a human, but he was no different than capturing that tiger shark off the coast of Australia. So sometimes parody can be controversial and shocking. People who were fans of Damien Hirst's piece could be insulted. Human rights watch people, all these things, they all take a turn at either upsetting somebody, pissing them off, making them grin, whatever. And Czerny, he deals a great deal with parody and knockoffs stuff. Okay? The next piece also deals with a realistic sculptural depiction. This is from 1999, and it is called La Nona Ora, or The Ninth Hour, by Maurizio Catalan. His installation of La Nona Ora is a life-sized statue or sculpture of Pope John Paul II struck down by a meteor. It was first exhibited in 1999 in at the, I don't know how to pronounce that, but it was featured at the Royal Academy of London in 2000, and it was also exhibited in the Zakieta Gallery of Contemporary Art in Warsaw, Poland, which is the late Pope's hometown. The auction house Christie's sold the piece in 2001 for $886,000. And a second version was auctioned in 2004 for $3 million. The controversy in this one's pretty obvious, especially if you're Catholic, especially if you really thought highly of the former Pope, John Paul II. Anytime you mess with religious figures, whether they be Jewish, Catholic, Baptist, Buddhist, whatever, you're going to catch some hell. And that's the point of it, is to catch some hell. And of course the reaction was pretty quick. The title of the work is traditionally significant in the Liturgy of the Hours of the Catholic Church. So there is a group of writings within the Catholic Church that is where you do the hours of the day and you're supposed to reflect. It's a meditation thing. Well, some of the things it suggests is mourning at the supposed hour of Christ's death. Beyond this, all sorts of narratives may result. Catalan himself is a Roman Catholic, suggests the calamitous degradation of the church as a result of scandals and quickly changing social values. Celebrating it with an extraterrestrial injury to the church. But see, the Pope's alive, and he clings to his cross, and maybe he represents the church's fortitude. And another way you could look at it is he's only a man and he shouldn't be venerated. He shouldn't be put up on a pedestal. Now, Catalan he leaves that up to the viewer. The Pope wasn't killed. He didn't smash his brains in. He knocked him down with a meteor as if it was God's vengeance. So there's lots of things you could take away from it. But a lot of people, they're like, it's a serious piece, but a humorous piece. It's disturbing. It's weird. It's funny, it's parody, it's comical, it's twisted. You know, it's definitely warped. Um, so, you know, and there were a lot of things going on right before Pope John Paul II died. That's when all the controversies broke out about pedophilia throughout the world within the Catholic Church. And a lot of this was kept from him. He was very old at this time. He was very sick. You know, the hierarchy, you know, a lot of people think that the Catholic Church is just a church. Oh no, it is a massive political system too. And anything that a human being's involved with is going to get messed with. You're never going to have, if people are involved, chances are somebody's screwing something up somewhere, you know. So, but anyway, when it was exhibited in Poland, 2 members of Poland's parliament took and removed the rock from the wax pope and attempted to stand him upright. Now, to the Polish people, the man that was known as Pope John Paul II was known as Karol Wojtyła, and he was a Holocaust survivor, and he was the only up to now Pope from Poland. And he was very loved and very respected in that nation. And to have it exhibited in his hometown, it was asking for a lot of pain in the ass. So, all right, before we go to the next slide, I'm going to cut there, and then I'm going to start up with the next one.